question is designed to be a little bit of a look deep into your souls, if you will. And we've heard the principle, the very famous leadership quote, people do not care how much you know until they know how much you care. So thinking about that line, what I'd like you to do is to reflect on a personal experience that you've had in your lifetime that would demonstrate to the audience here today that you have the capacity and the empathy and the notion of caring about the business community, and that you can go to Washington and truly be an advocate for this nation's business community. And when we're talking about business, we're talking about small business, we're talking about startup entrepreneur companies, we're talking about mid-sized businesses and even larger, well-established businesses. What can you tell us from an experience in your personal lifetime that would show us that you can be that advocate for the people in this room today, the risk takers and are the employers of this nation's workforce? So why don't we start with Congressman Cicilline. So a personal experience.
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a company that I have been working with, which I think symbolizes kind of the struggles of Rhode Island manufacturers. And this is, I think in many ways, this, I feel very passionately about manufacturing. I think it's an opportunity for us to really grow that sector of Rhode Island's economy, really important to the future of our country's economy. And there's a manufacturer in Woonsocket who brought operations back from overseas, is really fighting to stay alive, and has a big customer who's also in Woonsocket, but can't get the capital to have the inventory necessary to have that customer. So here's a guy who's really trying to hold on to his business and grow it, but is having difficulty because he's competing with companies overseas that have better tax advantages than he brings his operation here, which he did. So he did the right thing. He's having difficulty getting capital to grow that business. And this is like, these are conversations we have on a very regular basis because he's trying to hold on to this business and grow it. He's fighting against policies which undermine growing that manufacturing here in Rhode Island and Woonsocket. And he's got this moment where he has this customer who's going to be a huge customer and really help him grow his business, but he can't get the capital from the bank to have the inventory necessary to meet those demands. And I think it's an example of many of the things that are wrong with our manufacturing policy in this country. And when you see the sweat and blood that he put into building this business and to buy it and to bring the operations back, I think it's something we can fix by changing our tax policy so we don't incentivize bringing jobs overseas, making sure he has access to capital so he can grow his business, making sure it's easy for him to deal with the regulatory challenges. But it's an example, I think, of why I feel so passionate about manufacturing.
So Dory, talk about an experience that you've had that demonstrate that you have the empathy for the people in this room that have to make payroll.
Throughout my visits to businesses in the First District, by the way, we have 93,000 small businesses here in Rhode Island, and we want to grow those businesses. And I've been visiting for the last over a year, visiting with businesses to listen to their challenges and understand, beyond payroll, what their challenges are. The fighting with the hoping for tax reform, they need consistency and confidence in the tax scheme, and regulatory and licensure. But beyond that, the manufacturing companies that I've visited have told me that they could hire, and this is barring none, everyone I've gone to see has told me that they could hire 5 people tomorrow or 10 people tomorrow morning if they could match the job description with the skill sets. And we know we have a skill sets gap, and we know our leaders have talked about it for quite some time, but we haven't had any action. So I've been talking about the plan for a 1-year program for kids that graduate from high school so they can get a manufacturing degree with in areas like digital programming. But when I was telling this story to a group of young folks in the inner city, one of the fellows that was there was actually a little bit older, and he had tears in his eyes. And he said that I lack those skills, and I've been trying to get a job every day, and I skills. So we know what the problem is, we've identified the problem, we just haven't been able to put it together. I had the opportunity to go to the Public Occurrences Forum at Rhode Island College a couple weeks ago and put on my leadership Rhode Island Providence Journal. I commend them for that. And it continued to educate the Rhode Island and the workforce as to that very important piece to fill the skill sets gap, but we haven't been able to do it. So that's something I'm going to work on. And this fellow that had tears in his eyes, I promised him that when I get into Congress, I will set up not one but 2 different programs, and one of them will be free for the people who can't afford it, because he can't afford to go to work. He can't afford to pay for a course.
Mr. Hinckley?
Good morning, and thank you all for being here. Thank you, Lord, for the opportunity. My empathy for small business comes from the fact that my entire life I've been in small business, and I'm not just talking my adult life. I grew up in a manufacturing family. In fact, my family's been manufacturing things in New England for well over 100 years. And I can tell you that the problems we have today are the problems that we had yesterday. And those problems are largely the government. When you build things and you manufacture things here in New England and America, I have news for all of you in this room. Based on my personal experience, the government's not your friend. Not your friend at all. When you grow up in a family business, at the dinner table, usually the conversation goes to what's happening in the family business. And very often in our conversations at home, sure, we talked about the people showing up to buy boats from us, the boats that we build, the boats that fed 120 families when someone purchased them. But more importantly, we talked about the government and its impact on our family business. And the government would show up in various forms. Sometimes it was the IRS, sometimes it was the EPA, sometimes it was OSHA, sometimes it was the Department of Labor, and many other organizations. And you know, they never had good news for us. They never showed up and said, Mr. Hinckley, how can we help you build more boats? And you'd think the government would get it, because every single hour that is worked, the government makes money. You think they'd say, how can we help this business grow so they hire more people so we make more money? So eventually, after the government dealt a really brutal blow to our family business in the form of the luxury tax, which I'm sure many people in this room remember because it devastated Rhode Island, and it's estimated about 35,000 people lost their jobs in the marine industry because of that piece of legislative genius from Washington, D.C. I started over and I started a computer company. And in that business today, just like the businesses that I've talked to in the last year and a half that I've been campaigning here in Rhode Island, uncertainty about how the government is going to treat them is the #1 priority. How much more is Obamacare going to cost? I'm talking to companies, their insurance premiums have gone up between 18 and 25%, and this piece of 2,000+ page legislation hasn't been implemented yet. What are the tax consequences going to be for my business next year with all this fiscal cliff? Not only that, the uncertainty. Over 70% of Americans say they don't like our tax code. They want something new. And the failure of leadership in Washington, D.C., the bitter partisanship.
Mr. Riley?
I feel somewhat at odds with everyone else on this panel up here, because I'm not a part of government yet, and will be soon. I've owned and operated and financed about 20 businesses in my life. I currently run a small business in Narragansett, Rhode Island. I know exactly what it is that a businessman feels every day of my life. I don't have to go out on a tour to figure it out. But I did. I went out and I spoke to businessmen in Rhode Island all across the state. And it's the same problems that you might expect. It's the same that these people echo, but only here once or twice a year when they make their visits. But the problem is, as Barry said, we have a government that's a little bit too involved in what we want to do. And every time a business starts up and looks at what it has to overcome to actually open the doors and begin operating their dream, something that they've probably been thinking about for years and years, they have to go through a permitting process, they have a license process, they have to go to get loans at a bank, and usually it's 1 or 2 people that have this dream. And they have to hire all kinds of people just to get the doors open in the very beginning. So they need this capital at the startup. And where is this startup capital for this dream? It's not from the government, and it might not even be from this room. It might not be from the documents that I had to receive. It actually comes from real risk takers. You're looking at one. I took risk with dreams. I took people, I'm taking a person right now in South County. She wants to operate a thing called Becoming Italian Today. She and her family make great sausages, and they sell them in Belmont Market in Wakefield, Rhode Island. And she wants to take this business to become a Rhode Island business. She talks about importing and exporting out of the Port of Quonset, which we've really not done a good job of developing. She talks about taking this business and taking it international. She talks about all those things, but guess what? She couldn't open the doors. She needed the very beginning financing. And so what did she do? She came to someone like me, an entrepreneur, a risk taker. So what did I look at? What do I look at when I invest in a small business? I look at the chance that she'll be stifled along the way by government regulations. I took her to EDC. I said, maybe they can give you a loan. They couldn't give her a loan. She wasn't far enough along the way. I took her to a bank. The bank said, well, we kind of need to see a little bit more about how this business is operating, and we're going to need a couple of business plans. She didn't have the time to do that. She was making sausage. Now, I've invested in companies like this. I've invested in high-tech companies. I currently own a portfolio of 20 companies. I've served as an advisor at a venture capital firm. I've served as an advisor at a bank. I know what's going on in the real world. I know what's going on in business. And I passionately care about small businesses. The best thing we can do is get out of their way, and when they ask for advice, give it to them quickly.
Congressman Langevin, an advocate for business. Your
Laurie.
take on that?
Laurie, thank you very much for having us here. I want to thank the Providence Chamber for hosting this event. So I have grown up in a small business family. Both my mom and my dad, when he was alive, they had several small businesses over the course of my life. And just recently, my mom, 72 years old, just about a year and a half ago, started another small business. So I mentioned that I mentioned my mother's age, but that's probably not a good thing. But you know, I hear the stories even now about the struggle of keeping the doors open, needing payroll, again having access to capital, and the challenges of being a business owner. So more recently, also, I had about a year ago had a Women in Business Forum where I brought together people in government and women that are in business to find out, again, hear from them directly the challenges that they're facing. One story that stands out, Deb Giannini from Alpha Metalworks in Johnston, much the same story that my parents had struggled with over the course of their lives as well. The same thing of trying to find the access to capital, skilled labor, both attracting and retaining the skilled labor. So these stories are emblematic of the businesses that I meet with across the second congressional district all the time. So when I have opportunities to support things like SBA loans, trying to get the loan guarantee, fighting to get that back up to 90%, I know it's at 75% loan guarantee right now. These are things that I look to support. The Jobs Act that we passed that's going to make it easier to get access to capital for small businesses. These are things that we need to do because of the things that are facing businesses every day. So trying to be sensitive to their needs and finding ways to make it easier for business to operate and relieve some of the burdens that they're facing.
Now, presumably, each of you has given this next topic a lot of thought, and as has the folks in this room, and we've seen so many forums in the last several months, whether it be the Chamber Forum right in this room about the private sector leading economic development. We've had the Make It Happen. We've had the Rhinebeck Report. We've had, as you indicated, the public occurrences and Leadership Rhode Island, and there have been many, many groups that have really expressed a great deal of frustration and outrage about our business climate rankings. So my question to you is, thinking specifically about Rhode Island, what is it that's holding us back? And what can you do to turn around and really accelerate our progress? And I'll just throw it out there, anybody that wants to jump in, please feel free to do that. We'll have a lively exchange.
I'd like to start, thank you. It's the overall attitude of the business climate. We came in 50 out of 50 states for business.
And how does that make you feel?
It doesn't make me
How does
feel
the
too good.
congressional delegation, how do the candidates feel about representing a state where our business climate is really in a sorry state of affairs?
It's embarrassing. So let me just finish my thought. So we have the second highest unemployment rate in the United States of America. This is a beautiful state. Beautiful little state. We should be a model state. We can do better than this. We must do better than this. But we need to look at tax reform. We need to look at the business community and listen to them, the B2G, the business to government communication, and listen to them to be able to roll the red carpet out for our business community.
So you're talking about tax reform locally or nationally?
Both. And I think it was Mike Riley mentioned licensure, it's regulations and licensure, state and federal. So, we just need to be able to embrace our business community. Like I said, we have 93,000 small businesses here. Wouldn't it be nice if we could grow another 7,000 or 10,000 businesses to bring our friends and our folks that are on the unemployment rolls off the unemployment rolls and back to work? But to answer your question directly, it's tax reform, regulatory reform, the overall environment, negative environment on business, and we have to tackle that skill sets gaps.
Lori, I get this question a lot because Rhode Islanders want to know what you can do for them. And of course, this is a federally elected position that I'm going to win in about 2 weeks. And you can't directly influence Smith Hill with a legislative act because you're not on Smith Hill. But you can influence it with ideas. And the Colonel nailed it. It's the attitude we have in Rhode Island towards businesses. Smith Hill sees businesses as a place to harvest capital from. They don't see them as places that create jobs, which is why we have an incredibly high tax rate and, as the Colonel said, the worst environment in America to run a business. I mean, essentially, when you're in last place, starting a business in Rhode Island is like trying to grow corn on asphalt. It just doesn't happen. And I talk to business owners all the time, and when you're in a relationship and someone's mean to you, what do? You leave. And that's what businesses have done in Rhode Island, and unfortunately with them, we've lost about 100,000 residents in the last decade. Those people used to be here paying taxes. So the Colonel nailed it. It's the attitude we take towards business, realizing that businesses are who we work for, small businesses especially. But furthermore, realizing that when you're on a last place team and you're playing in a competitive league, doesn't it make sense to adopt the strategies of the teams that are winning? That's what they do in the NHL. That's what they do in the NFL. That's what they do in Major League Baseball. When you're getting your butt whooped, which we are getting our butt whooped by other states, you adopt the best strategies of the winning teams. We completely ignore the strategies of the winning teams. In fact, we double down on the losing strategies here in Rhode Island. So what can I do as a federally elected official? Something that we don't have today? Our delegation is all in with the Democratic Party. Fine, I like balance. How about a little balance in our delegation so we can actually influence Smith Hill? Because right now, they don't say a word. So when we go through pressing problems like the pension reform, not a word was said. When you have someone from the other party that's not ruling Smith Hill, the Republican Party, saying, why are you doing that?
So there's 2 points that I want to address. First of all, like many of us, I'm frustrated that Rhode Island hasn't seen more robust job growth. And when you look at where we were and where we are, I think one of the problem areas we identified is that after we never replaced we lost our manufacturing jewelry when we lost the Navy back in the 70s. We never replaced it with that thing of those anchor industries that are going to be really job creators for our state. So as a state, one of the things that we have to decide is what business do we want to be in, first of all, and put resources behind it to attract those, in a sense, also anchor industries. And we're also like a college football team that we're trying to attract the best and the brightest. Yet we have no scholarships to offer, we don't help with energy costs or housing when people come here, or food costs. So the idea of putting resources behind a jobs plan is going to be important. That does happen in major ways at the state level. And I'm glad to see the reorganization that EDC is going through right now, the state's going through. This is an opportunity for Rhode Island. But particularly at the federal level, we can be a part of that solution of providing access to capital. And I talked about something just a minute ago with SBA loans and the Jobs Act that we just passed. But also the idea we need to address the problem of our skills gap in our state. As a co-chairman of the Career and Technical Education Caucus, and a bipartisan effort, we've been trying to address that at both the state and a national level. Because how do you grow businesses here, or how do you attract businesses to Rhode Island if you don't have the skilled workers to do the jobs that are available? And that's one of the frustrations that many businesses are encountering right now, that when I meet with businesses, the owners right now, and I ask, when are you going to be hiring, what are the job prospects for the future? And almost to a company, they're talking about, we have job openings right now, and we're struggling to find workers with the right skills to do those jobs. So we've got to get on top of addressing the skills problem that we have.
Okay, so let's peel back that onion about the lack of a trained workforce as we're fully engulfed in the knowledge economy. What is it that can be done within the next 12 months to really retool our workforce? Because, Rome is burning.
Well, first I want to say thank you to the Chamber, because you've been such an important part of this whole development of the knowledge economy. But I want to just quickly respond to the question and then get to the workforce training. I think the reality is there's not a single initiative that Rhode Island can engage in to fix our economy. I think it's a whole range of things that we have to do. Some of it has to do with leadership in terms of promoting our state as a great place to do business, some good old-fashioned salesmanship to bring businesses to Rhode Island and to market the strengths.
What do you think is the most potent weapon that we have in terms of promoting the environment for business in Rhode Island?
I think
what is our best asset?
Our best asset is our people and the assets of our great universities and healthcare institutions, our small businesses, but promoting and marketing our state's one part of it. Second part of it is workforce training, making sure that we have a workforce with the skills necessary for the job of the 21st century. Making sure we have a regulatory process that people can navigate, an expediter who can help people get through, whether it's at the local or state level, to get through permitting, and so that we become a state known for it. That's a place you can go to start a business, and it's easy to navigate. Third is we have got to really recognize that we have incredible assets here. We have great universities, great healthcare institutions. The knowledge economy is a great example where we're trying to grow technology and innovation companies and sort of market both the knowledge district, but that sector of our state's economy. So build on the assets that we have. Workforce training is a very, very important part of this. There was a proposal, and Jim has been a huge leader in the Congress on this issue, but there was a proposal that the Republican House leadership offered to almost eliminate the Workforce Investment Act. What we have to do is fight to invest in developing a workforce so that we have a workforce that can compete with the jobs that are available in the 21st century. And so having effective workforce training programs that work, listening to businesses, what kinds of skills do you need in this new employee? Having real conversations between the employer and the workforce training folks, so you're actually creating skills that meet the needs of the employer is key. But there's a federal role in this. Workforce Investment Act resources are important, and fighting to protect those so that we can be successful in creating a workforce with the skills necessary for the jobs that are available in the 21st century.
What is your view on the Workforce Investment Act, Mr. Doherty?
Well, first of all, that was a great speech, but I don't see any action. We've been talking about this for a few years now, and I believe we just need to do it carefully, so we're not just picking winners and losers, and as a result of political favoritism. But we need to create that opportunity so businesses want to move in here. And like the Congressman said, and many members of this panel said, the skill sets gap is so important. That's something I talk about a lot. But we need to also, if we can bring companies in here, we have a brain drain over that. Matter of fact, my own son graduated from Brown University with a master's degree in entrepreneurial engineering. And there were not jobs here for him. He had to move out of state. He'd love to live here in Rhode Island, but he can't, because there are not job opportunities for them. So we need to continue to grow in that area.
To your point about the Workforce Investment Act and the fight that David described in Washington, I think in Vice President Ryan's budget, the so-called Ryan budget that Speaker Boehner ran through the House, they actually get rid of the Workforce Investment Act. They replace it with something with a new name about specific career training, but nobody knows what that means. And it's in a pot in his budget that gets cut in the next 2 years by 24%. So it's nice to be able to talk about how we can improve workforce investment, and we clearly need to because we have an accelerating economy technologically. And so in order to compete, jobs that used to be working in a factory, taking a piece of equipment, and you worked on the piece of equipment, now there's a computer that runs that piece of equipment. You've got to know how to run the computer.
Is that a
So
bad
it's a
thing?
different, no, it's a good thing, but it means that the skill sets are accelerating and we need workforce investment to allow people to keep up. People who are trained in another generation, we can't just throw them out. We've got to have the training there. So when the fight in Washington is, do we get rid of the Workforce Investment Act and do we cut it by 24%? That's a frustrating fight. We should be thinking, how do we do more? And the best example, I think, of doing more and doing it smarter is focusing more on the train to order aspect. I was at CCRI the other day when they graduated maybe 8 young folks who were trained in electrical engineering, and they'd been working with National Grid. So on the day that they graduated, boom, they were going straight into their jobs at National Grid. National Grid knew about their work ethic, they knew how they performed in a real life circumstance. It was terrific. The PACE program works very well, and I joined David in saluting Jim Langevin, because he's really, really worked hard on this with CCRI. He's been a real champion for this focused training. I think that has been the biggest gap. It's been basically, we'll give you the training and then you go out and do it. And then on the other side of the gap, there are businesses who are saying, we need folks, but we haven't closed that gap. And the PACE program and some of the work that Jimmy's led out at CCRI, I think, are that key link. Because that will really, I mean, there is nothing more reassuring when you're taking a bet on your own advancement and investing in your own future than to see how that path actually leads to not just a job in general, but a specific job at a specific company that is waiting for you. That's been the gap I think we've missed. But with the folks in Washington, the Republicans particularly trying to cut the workforce investment, but it's been hard to grow those elements of the program.
Mr. Riley?
I'm trying to say this in the nicest way possible in this forum. I've grown very weary of the government talk that I hear and the babble that I think is going on. Government doesn't create jobs. Your guys, all your programs for what you're producing doesn't create anything. What you do is you spend money. Rhode Islanders take their dollars, they take it to Washington, and then we try to get back as much as we send. We don't actually end ahead in this deal. And what you guys are trying to tell us is that you're going to set up programs that are going to create jobs that are going to take us out of 50th place. This sounds an awful lot like what you've been saying for a long time. Are there new programs that I don't know about? Are there?
Yes.
And what will take us out of 50th place? They didn't answer the question about the 50th place. I'm personally embarrassed. I'm not in Congress. I'm not in the Senate. I'm a resident of Rhode Island and a businessman. And I don't like to talk to people in other states where I have businesses. I don't like to talk to people in businesses that I own here in Rhode Island and explain why we're 50th on almost every single category. And then if they heard me saying this stuff back to them, I'd probably get hit. I mean, seriously, is anybody buying any of this? I've never hired anyone in my years of hiring, 35 years in business, from a workforce development program. Not one. What are you guys talking about? I want to start a business. I want an educated person that shows up at my door and sits for an interview. And I can talk to them about basic finance and math. Some of the failures that we have here in education in Rhode Island. I want a basically sound person to look me in the eye and say, I want to work on your business and I want you to train me. I trained everybody in all of our businesses. I didn't go to a school for training. I didn't go to a government program for training. I trained them. And I went out and got the best people possible. You guys make analogies to football teams and baseball teams. What does Bill Belichick do? He hires the best athlete possible. He puts them into his system. He gets football players, and he puts them into his system, and he figures out how to let them do the best within his system. That's what we ought to be thinking. It's a mindset. We have exactly the wrong mindset here in our congressional delegation. They think the government is going to all figure this out. You guys haven't created jobs. I have. So I would be embarrassed, absolutely embarrassed. As far as workforce development program, there is a proposal out there that I believe the Chamber of Commerce, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce endorses, that updates the Workforce Development Act. And it talks about having businesses be 2/3 of the representation in terms of deciding what workforce development training actually gets done. Over the years, workforce development programs have been a mystery. The GAO can't even tell whether they're operating properly or not. We don't even know if they're effective. Year after year after year, this particular act hasn't been reauthorized since 2003. Why is that? You had 2009 and 10 when you were working on your Health Care Act. You had both Congresses.
I think, it's certainly interesting that Mr. Riley has not himself hired someone from a workforce program, and I hope people don't make judgments about public policy based on a personal experience alone. But the reality is I've had the opportunity to speak to many, many businesses who present one of the greatest challenges they have is finding individuals for positions that have the skills necessary and the cost of training those new employees to do the work, and that is an obstacle to hiring folks. There are many examples, as Senator Whitehouse just mentioned, of programs where the job training is leading to employment, stepping up, building futures, other programs where people are developing skills necessary to go into work. So this notion of that job training is not useful. It may not have been useful in your own experiences, Mr. Riley, but I can tell you from the constituents I've spoken to that a variety of different kinds of businesses have said that having access to training resources to train new employees would mean they could hire people. And of course these programs should be effective, they should be cost effective, there should be direct linkage between skills development and the jobs that are available and a really robust interaction between the two. But the notion that job training is not helpful to small businesses is just not true.
So I don't want to change the subject or continue on this theme, but have it directed more towards the impending fiscal cliff. And do you think the uncertainty that surrounds this nation around what's going to happen before the end of the year is in fact putting a damper on the recovery?
Undoubtedly. Undoubtedly.
And where do you stand? What are there particular incentives?
I think we need to
cuts that you're going to
solve it. We've put, on the Democratic side, we've put $1 trillion in cuts already in the Budget Control Act. The sequester has another $1.2 trillion. That's $2 trillion in cuts that are on the table. We need to reorient the sequester, and I hope reduce it fairly considerably, but that's what's on the table. On the other side, in revenues, the country is at, I think the Providence Journal had in their editorial the other day that we're at a 60-year low in revenues and we need to add revenues. And the other side of the aisle won't put on the table
So do you think
tax
this nation
subsidies to oil.
do you think this nation can absorb a tax hike?
On the oil companies, absolutely. On the hedge fund billionaires who are paying lower tax rates than the guy who drives the package delivery truck to their door, absolutely. Getting rid of the Bush tax cuts over $250,000 saves $800 billion in the budget period that should go towards deficit reduction. We can do this. We do $1.2 trillion a year in tax spending. Over 10 years, that means you only have to get rid of 1/10 of it. The Republicans haven't put one on the table, not a nickel. And so if you're gonna take $4 trillion in cuts and have that be the way you go, the problem is, take a look at the news about Portugal. If you're gonna go an austerity route and just try to cut your way to health, look at what happens. We've seen it all over Europe. This is a demonstration in place. GDP down, unemployment up, recession worsening. It's not a good path. And when you've got revenues at essentially a multi-decade low, then having there be a revenue element in this only makes sense. We did fine under President Clinton when we last balanced the budget and the tax rates were not onerous and didn't break the economy, because guess what? The economy exploded at that time. It was our last successful budget effort until President Bush came in and just blew the doors off the deficit. We're still trying to fix that.
I'm going to go to Mr. Hinckley.
I
and
I
Mr.
keyed in
Doherty.
on a couple of things. First of all, a lot of our problems go away when people get back to work. The reason we're at a historically 60-year low of tax receipts, around 15% of GDP, is because not enough people are working, and they are shackled and harnessed by a broken 4 million word tax code that hammers businesses and hammers small families. The way we get out of these problems, the way we become less reliant on the tax code that's already broken, that no one likes, is once again, a failure of leadership, and that will bear out with the fiscal cliff we have. Again, a failure of leadership, and it boils down to the partisan fighting when you have people that vote 100% along their party leadership lines, instead of starting with something like Simpson Bulls, which President Obama, through his commission, asked for. It was completely ignored. We need a common ground starting point to solve this national crisis that is burying our nation right now.
I'm going to go to Mr. Doherty.
We know we need a balanced approach to revenues and cuts, but let's not be hypocritical. We're talking to the business community here and talking about taxing people who make over $250. We know that many small businesses make over $250. Those are job growers. So we need to be very careful on how we do that. I said earlier, we have 93,000 small businesses in Rhode Island. We're in tough times right now. Let's not kill some of those job growers.
I want to ask about that.
Yeah,
The
I think it's
$250,000.
really, really important.
Let's
Look,
talk about that as a philosophy.
absolutely. It is very important to recognize that every economist who has looked at the fiscal cliff in a serious way says you have to do two things. You have to cut spending and you have to generate revenues. Sheldon is absolutely right. We've already cut $1 trillion. What has been, particularly on the House side, what the House Republicans have refused to do is add one single dollar to revenue by ending subsidies to big oil, by ending subsidies to big agricultural corporations, by letting tax cuts expire at the top 2%, by ending the favored treatment of carried interest. You cannot, middle class creates the demand for small
Are there
business.
some sectors of business that are good and then some sectors that are not good?
No, I'm not suggesting there's good and bad sectors. What I'm suggesting is strengthening the middle class that provides the demand for small business and protecting 97% of small business from a tax increase. We have got to generate revenues to pay down our debt. You can't, Paul Ryan proposes a budget which adds $1 trillion tax cut for the people at the very top and then has the nerve to say he's a deficit hawk. It's a joke. He endorsed all the Bush budgets and created the deficit and then gives another big tax cut for millionaires and disinvest in things that we need to grow our economy. Workforce training, education.
As a small business grows and it becomes successful and hopefully to inure to the ownership of the business, we get up to the 250 mark and then all of a sudden, no good, right?
Right, obviously no good. But the question was originally, I believe, about the fiscal cliff. Right. Again, a lot of government speak to end up somewhere in some other discussion. We're talking about a fiscal cliff that is tantamount to a failure by the three people who represent our congressional delegation on this panel. That is a failure that we're in this situation. And guess what? On November 6th or 7th, regardless of who wins up here, we're going to punt. That's what's going to happen. These three guys are going to punt. You two are members of the minority. You have nothing to say. And there's going to be a congressional Republican House. So it doesn't even really matter what you guys are saying about this. As regard to the fiscal cliff, the fiscal cliff is the result of failures of previous negotiations. Of course businesses are upset about it. But I'm a businessman. I know what's going to happen. You're going to go to the old playbook and you're going to punt. So I figure there's a 20% chance you punt to March 15th, and there's an 80% chance you punt to July. And there's no chance that we have the problem with the fiscal cliff. So worrying about all these things that are going to happen on January 1st is just not going to happen.
Okay, we have about 5 minutes left, so I just want to ask about the Fed's monetary policy, QE, the quantitative easing. Has it been successful in terms of long-term interest rates and an ability to really grow the environment?
Well, I think whoever owns the paper contract to supply paper to the Fed for printing money is doing very, very well these days. Unfortunately, seniors in Rhode Island that live on fixed incomes that have watched gas prices double, food prices skyrocket, understand firsthand the cost of printing money. We are trying to print our money out of a depression based on horrible big government policies, and I think that is definitely going to come home to roost, as it always does in every other country's history, historically speaking. When you print money, it doesn't end well. And I know they have a fancy word for it called quantitative easing, but at the end of the day, it's money printing, and it's not good for the long-term health of America or Americans.
Anyone else on the Fed policy?
Well, let me jump. I'll say this, that we're, unfortunately, Congress hasn't been able to come together in a bipartisan way, which we should be able to do to fix our financial problems. At least the Fed has tried to act within the tools, within its toolbox, its capabilities, to act, and they've done that with QE 1, 2, and 3 that have at least kept long-term interest rates very low, and it's allowed some people many people to refinance, or especially for those people that are looking to buy a home right now, it's a unique opportunity. But obviously the interest rates are not going to stay low forever, and I'm hopeful that within that time frame in the near future, we are going to be able to get our fiscal house in order. I do believe personally that when the Congress comes back into session, and I do believe President Obama is going to be reelected, that the budget negotiations between Speaker Boehner and the President, where we almost had a $4.5 trillion balanced approach to getting a fiscal house in order, will be resurrected, whether it's some goals or the near deal that the President and the Speaker almost came up with. No one wants to see sequestration go into effect, because it's the worst way to budget. You're treating your top priorities the same as your lowest priorities, so it's a stupid way to budget. I'm hoping, but the bottom line is, it's going to come down to a balanced approach with revenues on the table, and yes, strategic budget cutting, that we're not just cutting for the sake of cutting, that we're actually cutting programs that aren't working, but we're spending, we're going to get a return on investment, whether it's job training or it's infrastructure. These are the things that we need to invest in. But at least the Fed has tried to act, to do something within its capabilities, and I believe that, at least for a time, the short-term interest rates are helping both business and families.
Okay, we have just a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to offer your final words of wisdom and parting shots, and take on anything that you heard this morning that you'd like to take issue with. So I will start with Congressman
Thank you again to the Chamber for doing this. I've served for the last 2 years on the Small Business Committee in the House, and we focused on both regulatory reform in a bipartisan way with the repeal of 1099, looking at issues of the SBIR and access to capital. I think we all recognize that small business is the engine of Rhode Island's economy. And we have to be looking at all the things we discussed today in terms of regulatory reform, permitting process reform, workforce training, all that. But I think part of our economic strategy has to also recognize that we have got to rebuild the middle class of this country. And the policies that the President has put forth, that we've been fighting for, Jim and I, are about strengthening the middle class, investing in innovation, education, small business, the things that are infrastructure, the things that are really necessary to grow and strengthen and rebuild the middle class of this country. That's a strategy for helping to grow small business, because that's where the demand for the products that small business produces. When you go to a small business and you say, what do you need to grow jobs? The answer I get over and over again is, I need customers. I need people to buy the stuff I make and sell. That's what the middle class of this country does. And so if we focus on looking at this through the lens of middle class families, what do we do to strengthen them, to protect them, to grow the middle class, we'll grow our economy.
Mr. Doherty.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here, Lori, and I want to thank the folks from Fidelity and the Chamber of Commerce. You know, I'm proud of my support from the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, because they understand that I get it. It's about jobs in the economy. We need to grow jobs in America. We need to grow jobs right here on Rhode Island. It's shameful that we have the second highest unemployment rate in the United States of America. We can do better than this. We must do better than this. For the next generation, we have a responsibility to correct this. So it comes down to leadership. And leadership's not about ranks and privileges and titles. Leadership's about taking responsibility for what happens on your watch and doing whatever you can to drive jobs back to Rhode Island and to America. You know, I've heard some statistics up here. It reminds me of an old saying that the figures don't lie, liars figure. Let me throw a statistic out for you. 70% of manufacturers pay taxes at an individual rate. I'm here to support the businesses of the state of Rhode Island. Thank you for having me.
You know, times are tough, and unfortunately, our federal government has spent about $5 trillion that they had to borrow from China and our children over the last 4 years. To put that into perspective, we spent $350 billion when a billion actually meant something. Remember that, when a billion was a lot of money? They throw these trillions around like it's chump change. We spent $350 billion to fight World War II. No one could believe how much money that was at the time. And we borrowed it from within. That money, $1942 adjusted for inflation, equals about $4.8 trillion. About the same these folks, these career politicians in Washington, D.C. have borrowed from our children. I ask you to look around outside. Do you see World War II type progress for the amount of money they've leveraged against our children's future? And I'd love to put this into perspective for you. 1 trillion seconds, just one, is almost 32,000 years. That's what they are doing to our children. I am a father and I'm a businessman. That is the sum of my life in my adult years. I'm not a D or an R. I'm a father, a businessman, and a Rhode Islander that cares about his state and cares about his country. And let me tell you, the definition of insanity is electing the same people over and over again and expecting a different result. We need new faces to solve the problems that the last generation of career politicians have left us. And we're not going to do it by doing the same things. We need to get the government out of the way and put the entrepreneur and small businessmen and women back in the driver's seat.
Lori,
Senator
let me
Witness.
join everybody in thanking you and thanking the Chamber of Commerce for hosting all of this. I spent a lot of time listening to businesses in Rhode Island, folks who come to my community dinners, folks who I see on my small business tours, folks who I visit when I go to factory floors. And it is absolutely clear that jobs and economic development remains a vital issue. It is also pretty clear to me that for many businesses there are in fact government programs that really do help. They help stem the counter-cyclical wash of boom and bust, and they help focus where there are gaps on the private market. Michael Black would not have national marker in this state if it weren't for the Small Business Administration, because there was a period when you simply couldn't get a loan from the private sector. So being smart about this and supporting those programs that are really creating jobs and helping us get out of the meltdown from that economic recession is vitally important. It's also vitally important that we not allow this discussion to hold a gun to our head for other purposes. So, for instance, folks who want to cut and voucherize Medicare are using this occasion to try to generate leverage to do that kind of damage to Medicare. I think that's dead wrong. That's, for me, a red line. I think folks want to push, there are folks who want to push Social Security into this discussion. It's got a $2.7 trillion surplus. They want to push it in this discussion. I think that's another place where we need to stand and fight. There is no private program that is going to support a kid who needs a Pell Grant. A kid who needs a Pell Grant comes from a family that doesn't have a lot of resources. And it's a piece in paying for college education. I think Pell Grants are absolutely vital to fight for. So we have to have this discussion. It has to be solved in a balanced and reasonable way. We cannot austerity cliff our way out of the sequester. And we also have to make sure that we don't take the core pillars of the American middle class and kick them out from under the middle class, because there's a group in Washington that wants to hold this issue hostage to get those things done, things that the American public doesn't want. So I intend to be a very strong advocate for Rhode Island in those fights, and I look forward to continuing to serve and continuing to represent Rhode Island for those critical purposes, jobs and protecting the core pillars of the middle class.
Thank you for having me as well, and thank all of you for attending. I know that you're probably hearing my words by the end of this discussion. What I have to say touches on a number of things here. First of all, when you talk about Southern Europe and austerity, let's remember there's two parts to that. What they've been forced to do, because they spent so much money, much money than they had, is to cut spending and raise taxes. That's what austerity is in Southern Europe. That's why you see rioting. Okay? So it's obviously not the right idea to cut spending and raise taxes. So that shouldn't be part of the discussion. I don't have raising taxes as part of my program. My idea is to simplify the tax code. Take 77,000 pages of the tax code down to 100 and lower the overall tax rates to maybe even a flat tax, or make it just simple 2 or 3 brackets. Take everything, including subsidies to oil companies, completely out. So don't hold that over me. The pledge to Grover Norquist, I refuse to sign that pledge. Why? Because I want to be flexible. I want to go down and be able to negotiate at my fullest. That's what I've done all my life. That's what I intend to do in Washington. All of this talk about this, people are holding you back from what you want to do, is unsatisfactory to me. I have a great idea about what to do. I want to grow the economy. And one of the points that we're looking at is the Federal Reserve policy. We have a Federal Reserve that is completely out of control. Why? Because our fiscal policy stinks and our government isn't working. And we haven't passed a budget in 4 years. All things that have to do with you gentlemen up here. If I go down to Congress, one of the first things that I'll say is if we don't pass a budget, we don't get paid. You guys all agree with that one?
I'm a co-sponsor of the bill.
Excellent. None of us will get paid. None of us will get paid. Let's pass a budget immediately. Now, with regard to Federal Reserve policy, one thing that you didn't mention, in 2008, TARP had a thing called interest on reserves. It was yet another tool we handed to the Federal Reserve. My discussion regarding interest on reserves was picked up by the Washington Post as being one of the 13th most innovative ideas in the United States. I'm thinking in different ways than these people are thinking. I'm thinking about growth. I'm thinking about taking the national economy and supporting it. To do that, we need to have a stable dollar. To have a stable dollar, we need to have a Federal Reserve that is not out of control, that is rules-based. That is within the power of Congress to set the mandates of the Federal Reserve. Once we have a simplified tax code and a stable dollar, and we cut into this regulatory nightmare that we have in Congress, we are going to be in a position where the United States economy will grow, and that will create jobs, and that will lift Rhode Island, because Rhode Island isn't going to have a miracle on its own. Rhode Island is a canary in the coal mine. We're last in everything because our policies that have largely been the part of some of these people who have been government their entire lives, both here in Rhode Island and in the national government, have failed, and they have failed miserably. I want to try something new. Let me grow the federal economy. Let me help lift Rhode Island.
Mr. Lingeman, you have the, Congressman Lingeman, you have the last 2 minutes, and then we will thank our panel.
Lori, I want to thank you and the Chamber for hosting us here today and giving us an opportunity to talk about things that we're all passionate about. And certainly, the things that I've been focused on and that I've always been passionate about is making sure that we're fighting to create a strong middle class. We all know that America always succeeds when the middle class is doing well. And one of the major things that we can do, obviously, to get our fiscal house back in order, and I agree with others who have said it, is that we put people back to work. We have people working, they're paying taxes, and there's better balance to our whole government, our country. And obviously, getting our fiscal house in order is going to require a balanced approach. We have to be strategic in where we're spending and programs that we'll cut, getting rid of those things not working, but making sure that we are spending, we are receiving a return on investment, whether it's in education or in infrastructure. Those are the things that are going to matter the most, along with making sure that we create a climate in the state and the country where my businesses can thrive and they can grow. And whether it's certainly a balanced tax code, certainty to our tax code, or it's making sure that we have a skilled workforce that are able to fill the jobs that are available now and that will be available well into the 21st century. I still believe that both Rhode Island's days and America's days better days are yet ahead of us, and I'm fighting to make sure that we can get us there. But we are clearly, we do best when we are all in this together. Those are the things that I believe in, that I have always believed in, and that I'm going to continue to fight for in Congress. Thank you.
Well, I'd like to thank each of you for spending time with us this morning and demonstrating and illustrating how much you know and also how much you care. So on behalf of the Greater Providence Chamber of Commerce, good luck to all of you, and thank you for coming. Today's session. Have a great day, everybody.
Good to see you, buddy.